The following stories may contain details that are credible, some even verified by official sources, but let me make one thing clear. That doesn't mean an alien encounter actually happened, and I'm not here to tell you they did. What you're about to hear are first-hand accounts retold exactly as they were shared. No claims, no conclusions, just the chilling stories themselves. You decide what to believe. But one thing is certain. Once you hear them, you'll never look at the night sky the same way again.
One quiet night, Betty and Barney Hill were driving home, their vacation in Canada now behind them. The road stretched out endlessly beneath a moonless sky, the trees on either side swaying gently in the night breeze. It was supposed to be a peaceful drive, the kind that lulled you into silence. Then, out of nowhere, they spotted something streak across the sky, a light, bright and fast. At first, they thought it was just a shooting star, a fleeting trace of beauty in the darkness. But then, it changed direction. It moved upward, a slow, deliberate ascent that shattered any illusion of it being natural. They pulled over on the side of the quiet road, stepping out of the car. The air was still, almost too still. Curiosity overtook caution, and they found themselves staring up, eyes fixed on the mysterious object now hanging in the sky like a glowing sentinel. It was utterly silent. No hum, no wind, just a hovering presence. Then it shifted. Without warning, it veered straight toward them. For a split second, time seemed to freeze, like even the air didn't know what to do. Then, instinct kicked in. Hearts racing, they scrambled back into the car, slamming the doors shut and fumbling to get the engine roaring again. Gravel sprayed behind them as they sped off, eyes wide, hands trembling on the wheel. But what followed was even stranger. When they finally reached home, something didn't sit right. They looked at the clock, both in the car and at home, and realized something was off. 2 hours. Gone, vanished from memory as if they had simply skipped through time. Neither of them could remember what had happened during that stretch of road between fear and safety. It was just blank, like a black curtain had dropped and only now was being raised again. It wasn't until later, under hypnosis, that pieces began to surface, small, jagged fragments of a nightmare neither of them wanted to acknowledge. Images of strange figures, a sterile humming light, the feeling of being watched, studied, examined. Their stories, though told separately, matched in disturbing detail. And there was more. Both Betty and Barney claimed that after the incident, their watches, worn daily and reliably for years, had stopped working. Not slowed, not glitched, just stopped. As if time itself had bent around them and left the devices stunned, unable to resume. They never truly drove the same roads again with ease, because once you've seen something that shouldn't exist, once you've lost hours of your life to a silence you can't explain, the night never feels empty again.
In 2007, Dennis Allende began waking up to a sound that didn't belong. It started off subtle, barely noticeable clinks and clatters echoing from his kitchen in the dead of night. At first, he thought it was just the old house settling, maybe a mouse or the wind brushing something loose. But it kept happening every night. Pots shifting, silverware rattling, the occasional thud, soft and hollow, like something being dropped on purpose. Each time, Dennis would creep out of bed, heart pounding in his throat, only to find nothing. No signs of entry, no mess, no explanation. Just silence and the unsettling feeling that something had just left, just missed him. Then, one night, it escalated. He woke suddenly, eyes snapping open, and there it was. A figure, still, standing right by his bedroom door. Dennis tried to move, tried to jerk upright, or at least lift his arm, but his body wouldn't respond. It was as if his entire body had been pinned down by something invisible and heavy. He couldn't speak, couldn't blink away the figure looming in the dark. And yet, despite the rising panic in his chest, sleep pulled him under again. The next night was worse. He woke again, same time, same dread, but this time the figure wasn't standing by the door. It was much closer, only a few feet from his bed. He could see it now, really see it. It was unnaturally tall and painfully thin, like it had been stretched out past human proportions. Its head was enormous, bulbous, elongated in a way that made Dennis feel sick just looking at it. Its skin, or what little he could make out in the dimness, was smooth and pale, almost waxy. And its eyes. There was a faint glow in them, not bright, but enough to make out the faint glimmer of intelligent focus. Cold, observing. Dennis lay there, helpless again, frozen in terror. The thing never spoke, never touched him. It just stood there, watching. Then, as silently as it had come, the figure began to move. It turned and walked slowly out of the room. Its movement was unnerving, too smooth, like it was gliding more than walking. The moment it left, something lifted from his body. Dennis could move again. He bolted out of bed and ran to the window that overlooked the backyard. And that's when he saw it. A craft, sleek, silver, otherworldly, rising into the sky in total silence. No engines, no smoke, just an eerie ascent, straight up into the night, until it blinked out of view like it had never been there. But it had. And there were signs. His pantry and fridge were half emptied. Cans, boxed food, gone. Fertilizer bags from the shed were torn open and almost completely drained. It wasn't random. Something had taken what it needed. And Dennis wasn't the only one who noticed. Over the next week, reports began surfacing from across town. People whispering about strange lights darting across the sky late at night. Not just locals either. Travelers passing through claimed to have seen sudden flashes or hovering orbs beyond the tree line. Some dismissed it, but others knew better. Because down in Dennis's backyard, right where he'd seen the craft take off, there was now a massive, circular depression in the earth. The grass was scorched, the soil unnaturally smooth, like something impossibly large and perfectly round had landed there, and then vanished. Whatever visited Dennis Ain't that week had left its mark, and it hadn't come alone. Three women were driving together late one night, just outside Stanford, Kentucky. The road was quiet, the kind of stretch where the darkness feels heavier, more complete. Trees loomed like silhouettes on either side, and the only sounds were the low hum of the engine and the soft thrum of tires against asphalt. They were laughing at something small, forgettable, when everything shifted. Without warning, the air around the car seemed to thicken. A blinding light washed over the vehicle from above, pale and soundless, yet powerful enough to drown everything else out. The car trembled slightly, the radio cut to static, and for a moment none of them could move or speak. It was like time paused, and then, just as quickly, everything went black. When they came to, they were still inside the car, still on the same stretch of road. But something was wrong. The clock on the dashboard showed that over an hour had passed. None of them remembered a thing. They felt dizzy, unsettled, like they had woken up from a nightmare they couldn't quite recall, but one that had left behind a deep, gnawing fear they couldn't explain. They drove the rest of the way in silence, each of them too afraid to speak what they were thinking, but all feeling it. This wasn't sleep. This wasn't a dream. Something had happened. In the days that followed, the unease only grew. Shadows felt too long. Nights felt too quiet. Their dreams, when they could sleep at all, were filled with strange flashing lights and the sensation of being touched, examined. Eventually, each woman agreed to undergo hypnosis separately, without knowing what the others had remembered. What came out of those sessions chilled everyone who heard it. The stories matched perfectly. Each of them described being taken from the car, lifted up into a cold, metallic chamber. They were surrounded by figures, tall, faceless, silent, who studied them with unblinking, glowing eyes. There were bright lights, unfamiliar tools, a strange humming sound that vibrated through their bones. One woman described a sensation of being submerged in liquid, though she wasn't wet. Another said she could hear the others screaming, but only in her head. All three remembered being paralyzed, aware but helpless. When the hypnosis sessions ended, each woman broke down in tears, not because they were in pain, but because the memories had felt real. Too real. To test their claims, they were each given a lie detector test, and all three of them passed. No hesitation, no deception. Whatever had happened to them that night, they believed it fully.
And they weren't the only ones. Dozens of residents in and around Stanford reported strange lights in the sky that night. Bright orbs darting across the sky, pulses of white light descending into the trees. A few said they saw a beam of light hitting the road, exactly where the women had been driving. For days after, the town buzzed with whispers and fear. Even the skeptics had to admit, too many people had seen too much, and none of them could explain any of it.
One man in Texas claims he survived something unimaginable, an alien abduction he says he narrowly escaped. He's never released his full name publicly, only going by James. But what James does share is a chilling account of that night, and a series of photographs he believes prove what happened. According to James, it began just after midnight while he was driving home from work on a back road near Georgetown. The night was unusually quiet, the stars blanketed by thick clouds. Then, a flash, sharp and blinding, lit up the entire sky, followed by an eerie humming that seemed to vibrate through his chest. He pulled over, disoriented, his engine sputtering without warning. That's when he saw it. Hovering above the tree line was something massive. Too big, too silent, and definitely not an aircraft. It didn't move like anything mechanical. It just floated, watching. He tried to run. The next thing he remembered was lying in a nearby field hours later. His clothes were damp with dew, his shoes missing, and his watch completely dead. His phone, which he didn't remember using, had snapped several blurry photos. Distorted lights, odd angles, and one image that showed a sleek metallic shape hovering in the darkness. Its form unnaturally symmetrical, with a row of pale lights like eyes staring down. To support his claims, James shared these pictures with local media and online forums. They quickly spread, igniting heated debates. Some pointed to strange anomalies in the lighting and background, evidence, they said, of something real. Others dismissed them as nothing more than low-resolution tricks of the night. But to James, they were proof, not just of what he saw, but of what he experienced. The fear, the helplessness, the overwhelming presence of something that didn't belong on this earth. Still, for many, the photos weren't enough. Skeptics demanded sharper images, clearer, closer, undeniable. But UFOs don't pose for pictures. They arrive, they terrify, they disappear. And James wasn't the only one seeing things. Around the same time, just miles away, a massive UFO was reportedly spotted hovering near Dyess Air Force Base in Texas. Multiple eyewitnesses described a silent, disc-shaped object with a smooth black surface that shimmered against the sky. It hovered low, lower than any aircraft should, and then, with a burst of bluish light, it vanished. Strangely, those weren't isolated sightings.
Several residents near the Georgetown area later claimed they had seen strange lights, multiple orbs pulsing with a rhythmic glow. They weren't scattered randomly, they were lined up. Two perfect rows hovering in the sky like some kind of formation, too structured to be natural. The lights held still for just under a minute. Then, in total silence, they disappeared. No trail, no sound, just gone. Whatever visited Texas that month left no wreckage, no explanation, only a growing number of stories. Different voices, same fear. And while the world demands clearer proof, those who saw already believe. Peter Corey had dozed off on his living room couch late one night. The TV was still on, casting flickers of soft blue light against the walls, when something jolted him awake. Two women were standing in his house. He wasn't dreaming. They were real, silent, watching him. One had long, pale blonde hair, almost unnaturally bright against the dimness of the room. The other appeared to be Asian, with dark eyes that didn't blink nearly enough. There was no sound of a door opening, no footsteps, just presence, sudden and complete. And somehow Peter knew the blonde one was in charge. Before he could sit up or say a word, she was on him, calm, calculated. She leaned forward and with both hands forcefully pressed his head into her chest. Not once, multiple times, holding him there with an unrelenting grip. Each time she did, his mind swam in confusion. It wasn't just the act, it was what he felt or didn't feel. Her skin was cold, too cold, and the texture of her body wrong, almost rubbery, artificial. Disoriented and panicking, Peter did the only thing he could think of. He bit her hard. His teeth sank into her flesh, into what should have been an incredibly sensitive part of the human body. But she didn't flinch. No pain, no sound, no blood. She simply stared at him, her face expressionless, as if nothing had happened. Then, without warning, both women turned and walked out of the house. No confrontation, no explanation. Just gone. Peter sat there frozen, drenched in sweat, heart racing. He was too shaken to even check the door, too afraid they might still be watching. It wasn't until the next morning, when he tried to shake off the whole thing as some kind of sleep paralysis hallucination, that he found something disturbing. A single strand of long blonde hair, wrapped tightly around his foreskin. It was constricting, almost like it had been placed there intentionally, twisted just enough to make him feel its presence, but not enough to cause immediate pain. His mind reeled. Peter had suffered a serious head injury just a few months earlier, a trauma that had left him with occasional memory lapses and dizzy spells. Doctors warned him of possible hallucinations or dreamlike confusion. But this was different. He could explain a dream, he could dismiss a shadow, but the blonde hair, physically there, twisted into one of the most sensitive and intimate places on his body, that wasn't a hallucination. No one else lived with him. He didn't know anyone who matched their description. He never heard them come in and never heard them leave. And the worst part? He had the overwhelming sense they had done this before, that this wasn't some one-off nightmare. It was a pattern, and it had just begun. A woman named Sonia had always considered herself grounded, rational even. But that changed the night she became convinced she'd been abducted. It started with strange flashes of light outside her bedroom window, moments before she blacked out on the couch. When she came to, hours had passed, but she had no memory of sleep, no dreams, just the lingering sense that something had happened, something wrong. Days later, she noticed a helicopter hovering low near her neighborhood. It was late in the evening, and the sky had already dimmed to a dull gray. But it wasn't the helicopter itself that unsettled her. It was the pilot. Through the cockpit's glass, Sonia swore she could see a man dressed completely in black, suit, tie, sunglasses, and an expression so blank it chilled her. He didn't appear to be scanning the area. He wasn't flying with purpose. He was staring directly at her house. Then the helicopter vanished behind the trees as suddenly as it had appeared. That night, Sonia's daughter woke up crying. She clung to her parents, shaking and pale. When they finally calmed her enough to speak, she whispered something that made Sonia go cold. There was a hand pulling my leg under the blanket. It wouldn't let go. Her husband tried to stay calm, but the fear in his daughter's eyes was too real to ignore. The next morning, he installed CCTV cameras throughout the house, living room, hallway, bedrooms. He wanted answers, or at the very least, proof. They didn't have to wait long. Just 3 nights later, around 2:42 a.m., one of the hallway cameras captured something no one could explain. In the footage, Sonia can be seen walking to the kitchen, wearing a robe, rubbing her eyes like she couldn't sleep. She pauses in the hallway, looking behind her, confused, maybe even a little scared. Then it happens. She vanishes. Instantly. No warning, no fade, no jump cut. One frame she's standing there, the next, gone. The lights flicker immediately after. The hallway is left empty, silent. Some who watched the footage were shaken. They said her story made sense now. It wasn't just paranoia. Something had taken her. Others, though, were skeptical, accusing her of staging the footage, editing it, making it all up. But for those closest to Sonia, the fear was real. Her daughter still wouldn't sleep alone. Her husband barely spoke. And Sonia? She came back. 3 hours later. The next camera clip shows her walking back down the hall in the opposite direction. Expression blank, robe untouched, no signs of distress. She doesn't look at the camera. She doesn't speak. She doesn't remember where she'd been. But she did say something else. A single sentence she mumbled before collapsing into bed that night. They said, "It's not over." Sergeant Moody had always been a no-nonsense man, disciplined, sharp, and grounded by years of military training. That's why the night it happened, he questioned his own mind more than anything else. He was stationed in New Mexico, driving along a quiet desert road when the sky erupted above him. A sudden cascade of meteors blazing across the stars in a violent, mesmerizing dance. He pulled over, stepping out of his car to take in the rare celestial display. That's when something else appeared. At first, it looked like another falling star, arcing downward faster than the others. But it didn't burn out. It didn't disappear. It landed right in front of his car. The ground shook faintly as the object touched down. Silent, seamless, too controlled to be a crash. It wasn't a meteor. It was something else. A craft. Sleek, metallic, and oddly reflective under the dim starlight. There were no markings, no windows, just a hum in the air, so low it made the hair on Moody's arms rise. Panic set in fast. He bolted back into his vehicle, slamming the door and jamming the key into the ignition. Nothing. The engine wouldn't turn over. The lights flickered once, then died completely. As he reached for his radio, a wave of dizziness hit him. His limbs grew heavy, his head light, and his vision blurred. In those final seconds before he blacked out, he thought he saw a figure moving inside the craft. Tall, thin, humanoid. Then blackness. When Moody awoke, it was hours later. He was still in the car. The craft was gone. So were the stars. His head throbbed. His clothes were damp with sweat. And his watch, like it had given up, was frozen in time. But the strangest part? He couldn't remember any of it. A massive block of time was simply missing, gone from his mind like it had been erased. Desperate for answers, Moody underwent hypnosis sessions to access whatever fragments of memory remained. What surfaced during those sessions was far worse than anything he'd expected. Under deep hypnosis, the memories spilled out, raw, chaotic, disjointed. He remembered trying to escape. When the figures approached his car, he slammed the gear into reverse and floored it. The car lurched forward instead, straight into one of the beings, knocking it to the ground. Another tried to reach into the driver's side, and in a surge of adrenaline, Moody punched it across the face. It didn't scream, it didn't bleed, but it didn't stop either. The others swarmed him, smooth, unnervingly calm. He fought back with everything he had, but it was like hitting shadows. In seconds, they subdued him, lifting his body effortlessly from the vehicle. What came next was a blur of sharp lights and cold metal. He was on a table, surrounded by them, beings with elongated limbs and featureless expressions. They spoke without words, their voices echoing inside his head like thoughts not his own. They probed him, not just physically, but mentally, peeling through his memories, testing his limits, observing his reactions. And all the while, he felt like an insect under glass, pinned, examined, catalogued. When he finally came to, it was like nothing had ever happened. No injuries, no proof. Just a memory unfolding like a nightmare he wasn't sure he'd survived. But the fear was real, and deep down, Moody knew he had seen them, and they had seen him. According to two teenagers, the night they were abducted changed everything they thought they knew about the world. They were working late at their summer camp, Camp Buff LG, nestled deep in the woods near a quiet lake. Their shift had dragged past sundown, and they found themselves alone at the docks, finishing up the last of their cleanup duties. The sky was clear, still, not even the hum of insects. That's when they saw it. Hovering silently above the water was a UFO, massive and smooth, with a faint glow pulsing along its curved underbelly. It wasn't just a distant light in the sky, it was close, too close. Inside, through narrow panels of dim light, they saw movement, figures, not human. The silhouettes were slender, otherworldly, gliding without walking. The teens couldn't move, couldn't speak, just stood there, transfixed by the sight. One of them tried to reach for a phone, but before he could even lift his arm, a beam of light engulfed them, blinding, paralyzing, and then nothing. Their next memory was waking up hours later on the grass near the tree line, several yards from where they had stood. They felt drained, dizzy, cold. Their clothes were untouched, but something had changed. Something inside them. Over the next few days, as the fear began to settle into them, memories started to surface. Brief, fragmented flashes during sleep or moments of stillness. They both believed they'd been taken aboard the craft. And they weren't alone. They remembered being restrained, lying on metallic slabs under harsh, flickering lights. The walls pulsed faintly with blue, like the craft itself was alive. The air smelled sterile, sharper than bleach, thinner than oxygen. The beings hovered over them, tall, pale gray, with no ears, no lips, just smooth skin and deep, emotionless eyes. Their noses were reduced to slits, and their fingers were long, webbed, moving with surgical precision. They didn't speak, but the teens could somehow understand them. One of the teenagers recalled hearing a message, not in words, but impressions, like thoughts being placed into their mind. We want peace for your world. It was unclear whether it was a promise or a warning. Both teens believed samples were taken from their blood, skin, even spinal fluid. One remembered the pressure of a needle at the base of his neck, though no mark remained. Later, an independent investigation was launched after rumors of the incident spread. The most disturbing part? Other staff and campers, people who had never heard the teen's story, reported seeing strange lights hovering over the lake that same night. Bright, hovering orbs, too silent, too fast. Some even mentioned beams of light piercing through the trees. But the real confirmation came when two more campers on completely different sides of the grounds confessed to experiencing what they called lost time. They too believed they had been abducted. Same craft, same creatures. Whatever visited Camp Buff LG that night didn't just come and go. It was watching, testing, choosing. And the question no one wants to ask out loud: are they done or just beginning? Two twin sisters shared a story so strange, so consistent, it unsettled even the most skeptical listeners. They said it had been happening for as long as they could remember, since they were 5 years old. It always began the same way, a soft light, not from the hallway or the street, but something purer, glowing, colorless and silent, flooding into their bedroom in the middle of the night. Then they would appear. The girls called them the Bald Men. It was their childhood name for the beings, tall, gray-skinned figures with oversized heads, long limbs, and large black eyes that blinked far too slowly. They had no hair, no ears, and barely any mouths, just tiny lines that never moved. But what truly made them different was how familiar they felt, as if they were returning, not arriving. Each time the twins said they were taken, lifted gently but firmly into the air, their bodies floating without control, through the window, through the walls, up into a waiting ship cloaked in the sky. They could never fight it, they could never call for help, and yet neither of them ever screamed. One of the twins remembered a specific night more vividly than the others. She claimed the interior of the craft had suddenly turned transparent. The floors, walls, even the ceiling, all vanished into glass-like nothingness. It was as if the craft itself disappeared, while they were still inside it, suspended in open sky. She looked down and saw the earth below. Clouds, forests, cities like glowing freckles across the curve of the planet. She said it made her feel small, but not in a bad way, more like she wasn't supposed to forget what she saw. To most, their story sounded like something dreamed up by children with wild imaginations. Until something changed. One morning, just after a night when the girls claimed they'd been taken again, their mother found a footprint outside their bedroom window. The ground was damp from rain, and there, pressed clearly into the soft soil, was something no one in the family could explain. It wasn't a human footprint. And it wasn't an animal's. It had a long, narrow shape with 3 toes, each ending in sharp, deep impressions, as if claws or talons had gripped the earth. The heel was elongated, the arch unnatural. It looked almost avian, but larger than any bird that should exist. Local biologists were consulted, but none could identify it. Some tried to suggest a hoax, but the girl's mother swore they hadn't even left the house. Neighbors, who had never believed the girl's tales, began asking quiet questions. A few even admitted they'd seen strange lights over the neighborhood more than once, but had been too afraid to say anything. The footprint stayed visible for days, untouched, until one morning, it too was gone. The ground smoothed over, as if someone or something had come back to erase it. And still the girls wait. They say the bald men don't come every night, just when they're needed. In 1978, a man named Dr. Herbert Hopkins was deep into the study of a particularly unusual UFO case. As a respected physician and hypnotist, he had agreed to assist with an alleged abduction investigation. But what began as scientific curiosity soon crossed into the unexplainable. Late one evening, Dr. Hopkins received a phone call. The voice on the other end was calm, polite, but eerily flat. The caller claimed to represent a UFO research organization, stating that he was familiar with the case Hopkins was working on and asked if they could speak further. Caught off guard, but intrigued, Hopkins agreed. Moments later, there was a knock at the door. The man was already there. Standing on the front porch was a figure that made Hopkins' skin crawl before a single word was spoken. He was completely bald, not just his scalp, but his eyebrows too, completely smooth, unnaturally so. His skin was pale and waxy, almost plastic-like, and the only color on his face came from an unsettling smear of bright red lipstick, drawn carefully over where his lips should have been. Because he had no lips. The man entered the house with slow, mechanical steps and spoke in a monotone voice, each word flat and measured, as if copied rather than formed. At one point, during their conversation, the man asked Dr. Hopkins to produce a coin from his pocket. Confused but curious, Hopkins did as he was told. The man stared at it, unblinking, and then, without touching it, the coin began to fade. First it shimmered, then grew translucent, and finally disappeared entirely from Hopkins' palm. The man said quietly, "That coin will never be seen on this plane again." The tension in the room turned heavy. Then came the real message. The visitor told Dr. Hopkins to stop all research immediately, to burn his notes, to erase everything he had learned about the case. It wasn't a request. It was a directive, calmly delivered, but laced with something chilling underneath. As the conversation dragged on, Hopkins noticed the man's behavior shift. His speech began to slow, becoming disjointed, as if he were losing power. His words dragging like a battery draining mid-sentence. His head tilted, his body sagged slightly. Then, without a word, the man stood and walked to the door. Outside, the darkness pulsed with a faint glow, and in the blink of an eye, he was gone. Not walked away, gone, as if he'd simply ceased to exist. For weeks, Hopkins tried to convince himself he had hallucinated the entire event, that it was stress or exhaustion or a cruel prank he hadn't unraveled yet. Until the man came back. This time, he wasn't alone. With him was a woman, tall, with the same unnatural smoothness to her skin. Her face was painted with makeup, poorly applied, as if imitating what she thought a human woman should look like. Her cheeks were too red, her eyeliner drawn in perfect geometric lines. She never blinked. Again, they spoke in flat, robotic voices. But this time, something was different. The man, still expressionless, began making strangely sexual comments. They weren't lewd in the traditional sense, but clinical and detached, as though he was trying to mimic intimacy without understanding what it meant. The comments weren't threatening, but they were wrong, deeply wrong. The encounter was shorter. As before, both the man and woman began to slow down, their voices lagging, their movements stiffening, like puppets with tangled strings. And just as before, they vanished into the night, leaving no trace behind. That was the last time Dr. Hopkins ever saw them. But even now, he refuses to speak about the case in public. He never resumed his research. The files were burned, the names forgotten. Because whatever visited him, whatever wore the faces of humans so poorly, was not from here, and it had made its warning perfectly clear.